"Go into the forest, Grace," Mason Reed said, his voice carrying over the snow. "If you are innocent, the dark will give back what you stole." The words left him cleanly, as if sending a woman alone into the forbidden woods was not cruelty, but ceremony. Grace Miller stood at the iron gate of the dark forest with a nearly dead oil lamp in one hand and the whole Silverpine pack behind her. Snow fell in thin silver lines, catching in her pale hair, melting against the worn shoulders of her old white dress and the thin gray cloak that did almost nothing against the northern cold. Beyond the gate, the forest waited. Not stood. Waited. Its black pines leaned together so tightly that the path between them looked less like a trail and more like an open mouth. Grace had been warned about that forest since childhood. No one entered after sundown. No one followed strange lights between the trees. No one answered if the wind called their name. The elders said old things slept under those roots, things older than the packs, older than the crown, older than the moon prayers whispered over newborn wolves. Tonight, the pack had decided those warnings mattered less than making an Omega pay for a crime she had not committed. Brooke Harlow stood beside Mason near the lantern line, wrapped in a white fur cloak that made her look soft from a distance and untouchable up close. In her gloved hand, she held the empty velvet case where the Royal Moon Emblem should have rested. The emblem was the ancient silver crest meant to welcome King Nathaniel Frost, the Alpha King of the Northern Territories, who was expected to arrive before dawn. Without it, Silverpine would appear careless before the crown, dishonored, unprepared, and somehow, Brooke had made every eye turn to Grace. "I did not take it," Grace said. Her voice was quiet, but the cold made it tremble more than fear did. At least, that was what she told herself. Mason's mouth twisted. He was a broad-shouldered alpha with a proud jaw and the easy confidence of someone who had never had to beg to be believed. "Then bring it back." A few wolves behind him murmured approval. Others looked away. That was the part Grace knew best. Not the accusation, not the shame, the looking away. She had seen it in kitchens when stronger wolves took credit for her work. She had seen it in the healing room when an injured child reached for her hand, and his mother later pretended Grace had not been there. She had seen it every day of her life as the moonless Omega, the girl whose wolf was too quiet, whose scent was too faint, whose kindness was treated like a flaw in a world that worshipped teeth and command. Brooke stepped closer, her blue eyes bright with false pity. "No one wants this to be difficult, Grace. Walk in, find what you hid, and return before sunrise. Then maybe the king will never need to know how low Silverpine has fallen." Grace looked at the line of faces beyond her, searching for one person who might say this was wrong. No one did. The snow kept falling. The gate creaked softly in the wind. Grace tightened her fingers around the lamp handle until the metal bit cold through her glove. She wanted to cry. She wanted to scream. She wanted to ask why innocence always had to prove itself while cruelty stood warm beneath lantern light. Instead, she lifted her chin, turned toward the forest, and stepped through the gate alone. The gate closed behind Grace with a sound so soft it felt final. Silverpine's lanterns blurred through the falling snow for a few seconds, warm gold against the black edge of the trees, and then the forest swallowed even that. Grace stood on the narrow path, holding the oil lamp out in front of her with both hands, watching its small flame tremble inside the glass. It gave her maybe 6 feet of light. Beyond that, the dark forest became shape and shadow, endless trunks rising like silent guards, branches tangled overhead, snow collecting on needles so black they looked painted against the moonless sky. She could still hear the pack behind her at first, the shuffle of boots, the low murmur of voices, Brooke's soft laugh carried by the wind. Then even those sounds faded, and Grace was left with the crunch of her own steps and the steady, frightened rhythm of her breathing. Silverpine had always lived beside the forest, but never with it. Their village sat less than a quarter-mile from the iron gate, built of gray stone cabins, smoke-dark chimneys, and narrow streets that smelled of pine wood, soup stock, and wet wool. In daylight, it could almost look peaceful. Children ran between houses with scarves trailing behind them. Hunters sharpened tools near the sheds. The kitchen windows steamed before sunrise, and Grace was usually there before anyone else, stirring oatmeal in a pot large enough to feed 30 people, packing bread into cloth bundles, setting aside the softest pieces for elders whose teeth had grown weak. No one praised her for it. Praise did not belong to Omegas and Silverpine. Work did. Silence did. Endurance did. Grace had learned those rules before she was 12. Her wolf had never arrived the way other wolves did. There had been no bright awakening, no surge of power, no moment when the pack turned toward her and recognized a scent worth naming. Her wolf was a whisper under snow, so quiet that even Grace sometimes wondered if she had imagined her. The pack called her moonless because it sounded kinder than useless, though they meant the same thing. Yet the strange part was that Grace could feel pain before people spoke of it. She knew when a child had a fever before the child cried. She knew when an old hunter's knee ached by the way his anger sharpened. She knew when someone carried grief in their chest like a locked room. It was not power, the alphas said. It was softness, a kitchen gift, a nursemaid trick. But to Grace, it was the only truth in her body that had never abandoned her. The forest path dipped lower, and snow rose above her ankles. Her shoes were already wet. Cold crept through the thin soles and climbed her legs, but she kept walking. Somewhere ahead, hidden in the dark, Brooke had claimed the Royal Moon Emblem was waiting. Grace did not believe it. Brooke never made mistakes. She planned her smiles, her insults, even the way she let silence stretch until weaker people filled it with apologies. If the emblem was here, then Brooke had placed it here. If it was not, then Grace had been sent to fail before the Alpha King arrived. The thought made her throat tighten, but she pushed forward. A branch snapped somewhere to her left. Grace stopped. The lamp flame fluttered. "It is only the wind," she whispered, though the wind did not breathe like that. The forest answered with silence. Then, far ahead, something silver flashed between the trees. The silver flash appeared again, faint and quick, half hidden behind a curtain of pine branches. Grace held her breath. For one wild second, hope rose before fear could stop it. The Royal Moon Emblem was silver, shaped like a crescent clasped around a northern star. If Brooke had hidden it nearby, Grace could take it back, walk out of the trees, and stand before the pack with proof in her hands instead of shame on her shoulders. She moved toward the glimmer, each step slow, the lamp held close to her chest. Snow deepened around the roots, swallowing her shoes, numbing her toes until they felt distant from the rest of her body. The forest seemed to lean in as she passed. Branches brushed her cloak like fingers trying to turn her around. A low sound moved through the trees, not quite wind, not quite voice. Grace told herself not to listen. The flash came from a hollow beneath an old black pine, where the roots twisted above the ground like the ribs of something sleeping. There, caught on a broken branch, hung the Royal Moon Emblem. It spun gently in the cold air, silver bright against the bark, impossible to miss if someone knew where to look. Grace stared at it, and the truth settled cold in her stomach. This was no accident. Brooke had not lost it. She had placed it exactly far enough into the forest to make Grace vanish from the welcoming ceremony, maybe from Silverpine altogether. Grace reached for the emblem with shaking fingers, but before she touched it, her eyes caught the ground below. The snow was disturbed, not by one person, by many. Deep boot prints crossed over wide palm marks. Broken twigs lay scattered in a rough circle. A strip of black fabric clung to a thorn bush, embroidered with a silver crown she had only seen on royal letters. Grace's pulse began to hammer. The Alpha King's crest. The world narrowed to the lamp flame, the emblem, and the sudden certainty that something much larger than Brooke's cruelty had happened here. She lifted the emblem from the branch and tucked it into her cloak. Then she heard the breathing. Heavy, uneven, close. Grace turned slowly toward a cluster of ancient roots where the darkness gathered thickest. Two silver eyes opened within it. Her body froze. The creature lying beneath the roots was larger than any wolf she had ever seen, black as the space between stars, its fur dusted with snow, its chest rising with effort. A torn piece of dark royal cloth lay beneath one massive paw. Grace should have run. Every story she had ever heard about the dark forest told her to run. But the wolf did not spring. It did not bare its teeth. It only watched her with those winter silver eyes, and through the fear ringing in her ears, Grace felt something else. Pain, not rage, not hunger. Pain so deep it pressed against her gentle gift like a hand against glass. "You are hurt," she whispered. The wolf's gaze sharpened, as if it understood every word. Grace took one step back, then stopped. Behind her waited a pack that had sent her here alone. Before her lay a creature everyone else would call a monster. But monsters did not always look like the stories said. Sometimes they wore velvet and smiled under lanterns. Sometimes they stood in circles and said nothing. Sometimes the thing in the dark was only a soul trying not to disappear. Grace lowered the lamp to the snow. Her hands trembled as she opened the small herb pouch at her waist. "I am not going to hurt you," she said, voice shaking but clear. "Please do not make me regret being kind." The wolf closed its eyes for one slow breath, almost as if giving permission. Grace moved closer, and deep inside her chest, where her silent wolf had slept beneath years of shame, something stirred. Grace knelt in the snow beside the great black wolf, careful not to move too quickly. Up close, he seemed less like a beast from a warning tale and more like a fallen piece of night, powerful even in stillness, proud even when pain had forced him beneath the roots. His silver eyes followed every motion of her hands. They were not wild. That was what unsettled her most. They were clear, watchful, almost human, filled with a cold intelligence that made Grace feel seen in a way Silverpine had never allowed her to be. "I know," she whispered when his breathing sharpened. "It hurts. I can feel it." The words slipped out before she meant them to. She had never told anyone how deeply other people's pain reached her. In Silverpine, secrets were safer than gifts. Gifts could be mocked, used, or taken. She opened her herb pouch and drew out a folded cloth, a small tin of pine salve, and a bundle of dried moon leaf tied with thread. Simple things. Kitchen things. Nursemaid things, as Brooke would have called them. But her mother had once told her that simple things kept people alive when pride failed. Grace pressed the cloth gently near the torn edge of the wolf's dark shoulder guard, where a narrow shard of silver-black metal had caught in the leather and fur. The wolf gave a low warning sound, and Grace went still at once. "All right," she said softly. "I will not touch it yet." Snow drifted between them. The lamp flame flickered gold against the roots. Somewhere far behind her, Silverpine's lanterns were gone completely now, swallowed by distance and trees. No one was coming. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, it steadied her. There was no audience here. No Brooke watching for weakness. No Mason twisting her words. No pack deciding what her life was worth. There was only the cold, the dark, and a wounded creature who had not chosen to harm her. Grace reached again, slower this time. "I need to pull this free," she said. "If it stays, you will not make it back to wherever you came from." The wolf's eyes locked on hers. For a moment, Grace felt a pressure brush against her mind. Not words exactly, but meaning. Trust. Or perhaps warning. She could not tell. She wrapped the cloth around the shard and eased it loose with careful hands. The wolf's body tensed, but he did not move against her. When the metal came free, the forest seemed to exhale. Grace dropped the shard into the snow, where it smoked faintly, darkening the white around it without flame. Cursed silver. Her breath caught. "Who did this to you?" she whispered. The wolf lowered his head, exhausted, and something in Grace broke open. Not fear, not pity. Something older, warmer, stronger than both. She pressed the moon leaf into the salve, then laid her palm near the wound without forcing pressure. "Please," she murmured, though she did not know who she was asking. The moon. Her silent wolf. The old forest itself. "Let me help him." A soft white light bloomed beneath her hand. Grace froze. The glow spread through her fingers, gentle as dawn through curtains, tracing the lines of her palm before flowing into the torn fabric and dark fur. The wolf's breathing eased. His eyes widened, reflecting the light back at her. Deep inside Grace's chest, the whisper she had mistaken for emptiness rose clearer than it ever had before. "Mate." Grace pulled her hand back as if the word had burned her, but the light did not vanish. It lingered between them, silver white, alive, impossible. The black wolf lifted his head, and for one breathtaking second, the shadows around him folded inward like a cloak. Grace watched as the shape before her shifted, not violently, not like a nightmare, but like moonlight changing on water. Fur became torn black fabric. Paws became gloved hands pressed into the snow. The great wolf became a man kneeling beneath the ancient roots, tall, even brought low, broad-shouldered beneath ruined royal armor. his pale face marked by exhaustion and command. Silver eyes met hers. Grace knew those eyes now. Every wolf in the north knew them from coins, seals, and whispered stories. King Nathaniel Frost drew one slow breath, looked at the Omega kneeling beside him, and said, "They sent you into the dark to disappear." His voice was rough but steady. "The moon sent you here to find me." Grace stared at the man before her, and for a moment the entire forest seemed to fall away. Not the snow, not the cold, not even the old shadows between the trees could compete with the impossible truth kneeling inches from her lamp. King Nathaniel Frost, the Winter King, the Alpha of the Northern Territories, was in the dark forest with cursed silver smoking in the snow beside him and exhaustion hidden behind eyes bright enough to shame the stars. Grace should have bowed. She should have lowered her gaze, stumbled over royal titles, begged forgiveness for touching him without permission. Every rule Silverpine had carved into her bones told her to become small in the presence of power. But he swayed slightly, one hand pressing into the snow to keep himself upright, and the healer in her moved before the Omega could shrink. "Do not try to stand yet," she said. Her voice surprised them both. Nathaniel looked at her, one dark brow lifting despite the strain in his face. "You are giving orders to your king." Grace's cheeks warmed even in the cold. "I am trying to keep my king from falling face first into a snowbank." Silence held for one breath. Then something almost like a laugh moved through his chest, faint and rough, gone before it could become softness. But Grace saw it. The crack in the legend. The man beneath the crown. She reached for the salve again, careful to keep her eyes on his face, not on the torn edge of his armor. "Who attacked you?" Nathaniel's expression closed. The forest seemed to darken with it. "Men who knew my route." Grace's fingers stilled. "Someone from Silverpine?" He did not answer quickly, and that was answer enough. Her stomach turned. Brooke's accusation. Mason's command. The emblem hidden exactly where Grace would find the royal crest, the signs of struggle, the cursed silver. This was not one scheme. It was two, braided together in the dark. Someone had wanted Grace gone from the village. Someone had wanted the Alpha King trapped far from his guards. And somehow, both threads had led to the same tree. Nathaniel watched understanding move across her face. "You were not meant to find me," he said. "You were meant to take the blame for what happened after I did not arrive." Grace looked down at the Royal Moon Emblem tucked inside her cloak. The silver crescent felt suddenly heavy, not like proof, but like bait. "Brooke said I stole this." "Did you?" he asked. There was no accusation in his voice, only the steady weight of a man who wanted the truth spoken plainly. Grace lifted her chin. "No," Nathaniel nodded once, as if her word required no witness. The simplicity of it nearly undid her. "Then I believe you." Grace had been cold before, but those 4 words made her tremble. Not because they were grand, because no one in Silverpine had given them to her when they cost nothing. This man gave them to her while wounded in the forbidden woods, with danger still breathing through the trees. A distant sound moved beyond the pines. Not wind this time. A low creak. A whisper of snow falling from branches where nothing had touched them. Nathaniel turned his head sharply. Grace felt the pressure in the forest change, as if the dark had noticed the light between them and did not like it. "Can you walk?" she asked. "Yes." He tried to rise and faltered, only a little, but enough for Grace to step closer. He looked at her offered arm as if no one had dared offer him help in years. "Your pack sent you here alone," he said, "and still you would help me return to them." Grace swallowed. "I am not helping them." She slid his arm carefully across her shoulders, steadying him as best she could. He was tall, solid, wrapped in cold and command, yet he let her bear a small part of his weight without making it feel like shame. "I am helping you." Nathaniel looked down at her then, and the silver in his eyes softened with something that frightened her more than the forest. Recognition. "Grace Miller," he said, speaking her name like it mattered. "When we leave these trees, stay beside me." The path behind them seemed longer now, darker, alive with secrets. Grace tightened one hand around the lamp and the other around the emblem hidden beneath her cloak. For the first time in her life, she was not walking back to Silverpine as the Omega they had sent away. She was walking back with the king they had failed to protect. The walk back through the dark forest became a test of every quiet strength Grace had ever been told did not count. Nathaniel moved beside her with controlled effort, his arm resting lightly across her shoulders, never pressing more weight than she could bear, even when the path dipped beneath fallen branches and the snow deepened past her ankles. He was not helpless. Even wounded and exhausted, he carried command in the set of his jaw, in the way the forest seemed to make room for him and fear him at once. But he was hurting, and Grace could feel it with every step, a deep cold ache threaded with something darker than pain. The cursed silver had left more than a mark. It had awakened whatever waited inside the woods. The trees creaked though there was no wind. Shadows stretched in the corners of her lamplight, then folded back when the silver glow from her hand pulsed faintly against Nathaniel's armor. Grace noticed it the third time it happened. "The light," she whispered. "It is following us." Nathaniel looked down at her hand, where a soft moon-white shimmer lingered beneath her skin. "No," he said. "It is answering you." Grace almost stumbled. He steadied her at once, his hand careful, respectful, never holding longer than needed. That gentleness from someone so feared made her chest tighten. "I do not have power like that," she said. "My wolf barely speaks." Perhaps she was waiting for someone who would listen. The words sank into her more deeply than the cold. Grace had spent years thinking her silence meant emptiness. What if it had been patience? What if the part of her everyone dismissed had been watching, waiting, saving its voice for the one moment that mattered? Ahead, the path divided. One trail curved left toward the gate, marked by old stones half buried in snow. The other led deeper into the forest, where black roots twisted above the ground like sleeping serpents. Grace turned toward the gate, but Nathaniel stopped. His gaze fixed on the darker trail. "There," he said. Grace followed his eyes and saw symbols carved into 3 dead trees, each mark shaped like a crescent moon split by a thorn. The same symbol glimmered faintly on the cursed silver shard wrapped inside her cloth pouch. The same symbol, she realized with a chill, had been etched on the underside of the Royal Moon Emblem. "That was not Silverpine's mark," she whispered. Nathaniel's face hardened. "No, it belongs to the old curse of the Northern Crown." The forest seemed to listen when he said it. Grace tightened her grip on the lamp. "Then the person who hid the emblem knew about the curse, and knew the emblem would lead you to me." His voice was low, edged with restraint. This was not only an attack. It was a message. Grace wanted to ask from whom, but a faint golden glow appeared ahead through the trees. Lanterns. The gate. Silverpine. Dawn had not come yet, but the sky above the black pines had begun to pale from pitch dark to iron gray. Behind the gate, the pack waited, likely warm under cloaks, likely certain she would return empty-handed or not at all. Grace felt the old fear tighten around her throat. Nathaniel sensed it. "You do not have to face them alone." She looked up at him. Snow clung to his dark hair, and the torn edge of his royal cloak moved in the cold air, but his silver eyes were steady on hers. Not commanding, offering. Grace thought of Brooke's smile, Mason's order, all the faces turned away while she stepped through the gate. Then she thought of the great black wolf choosing not to harm her, the king believing her without proof, the quiet voice inside her that had finally spoken one word. "Mate." Grace lifted her chin. "Then we faced them together." Nathaniel's expression changed, subtle as first light crossing ice. He straightened beside her, drawing himself back into the shape of a king. When they reached the iron gate, the first wolves of Silverpine saw them and went utterly still. Grace stepped out of the dark forest with the Royal Moon Emblem in her hand and the Alpha King at her side. The silence at the gate was deeper than the forest behind them. Silverpine Pack stood beneath the last lanterns of night, their cloaks dusted with snow, their faces pale in the iron-gray light before dawn. No one had expected Grace to return. She could see it in the way mouths parted without words, in the way elders clutched their sleeves, in the way the younger wolves stepped back as if the dark had followed her out. Brooke Harlow stood near the front in her white fur cloak, beautiful and frozen, the empty velvet case still held against her chest. Mason Reed was beside her, broad shoulders tense, pride draining from his face as his eyes moved from the Royal Moon Emblem in Grace's hand to the tall man standing at her side. For one terrible second, no one recognized him. Nathaniel's armor was torn at the edges, his black cloak marked by snow and forest shadow, his silver hair loose around a face cut with exhaustion. He did not look like the perfect royal image stamped on coins. He looked real, cold, wounded, alive. Then Elder Thomas saw the silver crown crest on Nathaniel's shoulder guard and dropped to one knee so quickly the snow scattered around him. "Your Majesty." The words broke the spell. One by one, the pack fell into bows and kneels, a wave of fear and astonishment moving through them. Brooke's face lost all color. Mason lowered himself last, stiff with disbelief. Grace remained standing because Nathaniel's hand, light but unmistakable, rested at her shoulder. Not to lean now, to keep her beside him, to make sure every wolf saw that the Omega they had sent away had returned under the protection of the king. "Rise only when I permit it," Nathaniel said. His voice was not loud, but it carried farther than any shout. No one moved. Grace felt the old instinct pull at her knees, the habit of lowering herself whenever power entered the room. Nathaniel seemed to feel it too. His hand shifted slightly, grounding her. "Stay," that small gesture said. So she stayed. Mason swallowed hard. "Your Majesty, we were told you had been delayed on the northern road. We were preparing a search party." Nathaniel looked at him with winter patience. "Were you?" Mason's gaze flickered to the gate, then to Grace. "Of course." Brooke found her voice, smooth but trembling at the edges. "Thank the moon Grace found you. We sent her to retrieve the emblem, never imagining you were inside the forest." Grace's fingers tightened around the silver crest. The lie sounded almost graceful when Brooke spoke it. That had always been her talent, turning cruelty into concern before anyone could object. But this time, Grace was not standing alone in the kitchen or the healing room. This time, the king had heard the shape of the truth before the lie could cover it. Nathaniel held out his hand. Grace placed the Royal Moon Emblem in his palm. The moment his fingers closed around it, the underside glowed with the cursed crescent and thorn mark. The pack gasped. Brooke stepped back as if the light had named her. Nathaniel turned the emblem so all could see. "This was not lost," he said. "It was planted." His gaze moved to Brooke, then Mason. "And the path it marked led not only to this Omega, but to me." Mason opened his mouth, but nothing came. Brooke's composure cracked, fear shining through the polished mask. Grace expected triumph to rise in her, but all she felt was a tired sadness. They had sent her into darkness because they believed no one would care if she disappeared. Now the dawn was coming, and every hidden thing was standing in the light. Nathaniel stepped forward, placing himself slightly before Grace without blocking her from view. Grace Miller entered the dark forest alone because this pack failed its own. She found the emblem. She found the truth. And when she discovered her king in danger, she chose mercy over fear. His voice lowered, colder than the snow beneath them. "Tell me, Silverpine, which of your alphas did the same?" No one answered. The silence was confession enough. The question remained in the cold dawn air, and Silverpine had no answer worthy of speaking. Grace looked across the bowed heads and saw the truth moving through them slowly, painfully, like light entering a room that had been locked for years. Some faces showed fear. Some showed shame. Some showed only the careful calculation of wolves trying to survive the king's anger. Brooke was the first to lift her chin, though her hands trembled around the empty velvet case. "Your Majesty," she said, forcing Grace into every word. "I admit the emblem was placed in the forest, but only because I believed Grace had been careless with it earlier. I wanted her to learn responsibility before your arrival. I never knew you were there." The lie was smaller now, desperate enough to show its seams. Mason seized it anyway. "That is true. We only meant to discipline her. We would have gone after her before sunrise." Grace felt the old chill of it, not from the snow, but from how easily they changed the shape of what they had done. Discipline, lesson, responsibility. Softer words for sending someone alone into a place everyone feared. Nathaniel turned the glowing emblem in his hand. "You would have gone after her," he repeated. Mason nodded too quickly. "Yes, Your Majesty." "Then why were no horses saddled?" Nathaniel asked. "Why were no trackers called? Why did I pass no scent of a search party on the road or near the trees?" Mason went still. The pack heard the emptiness of his answer before he failed to give one. Nathaniel looked to Elder Thomas. "Bring the village watch log." The elder hurried to a guard post near the gate and returned with a leather-bound record, his fingers stiff with cold. Nathaniel did not open it himself. He handed it to Grace. The gesture drew a quiet gasp from the pack. Grace stared at the book as if it were something sacred. "Read the final entry," he said. Her hands shook, but she opened the cover. The ink was dark and fresh. By order of Mason Reed, no patrol is to enter the dark forest until dawn. The accused Omega is to return alone or not at all. Grace's voice faded on the last words. Not at all. There it was. Not whispered. Not implied. Written down in neat black ink. The pack lowered their eyes. Brooke stopped pretending. Mason's face hardened, but beneath the pride was fear. Nathaniel's expression did not change, and that was worse than anger. You did not discipline her, he said. You abandoned her. Grace closed the log slowly. She expected the words to break something inside her, but they did not. Perhaps because she had already known. Perhaps because hearing the truth spoken by someone else made it lighter to carry. Nathaniel stepped back, giving her space before the pack. Grace Miller, he said, not as a command, but as an invitation. What do you ask of the crown? Every wolf looked at her. Once, that would have crushed her. Now she felt the snow beneath her feet, the emblem's light in her hands, the quiet warmth of her wolf awake inside her chest. She could have asked for punishment. She could have asked for exile. She could have asked for every cruel voice to be silenced forever. Instead, she looked at the Omegas standing at the edge of the crowd, their thin cloaks drawn tight, their faces filled with a hope they were afraid to show. No Omega goes into the forest alone again, Grace said. No one is punished without proof. And no one gets to call cruelty discipline. The words were simple. They were not revenge. They were stronger than revenge. Nathaniel bowed his head once, accepting them before all of Silverpine. So ordered. The decree passed through the pack like thunder without sound. Grace felt the weight of it settle, not as a crown, not yet, but as something steady placed into her hands. Then the Royal Moon Emblem flared brighter. The crescent and thorn mark lifted from its silver surface and appeared across Grace's palm in soft white light. At the same moment, beyond the iron gate, the dark forest answered. Every dead tree along the path glowed with the same symbol. The glowing symbols turned the forest from a place of punishment into a wall of silent prophecy. Grace stood just beyond the gate with the Royal Moon Emblem burning softly in her palm, while the same crescent and thorn mark awakened on every dead tree along the path she had taken alone. Silverpine watched in stunned silence. The alphas who had once laughed at her lowered their eyes. The betas who had followed Mason's orders stepped back from him, as if shame had finally become visible. Even Brooke's polished beauty looked fragile beneath the gray dawn, because no lie, no title, no practiced smile could explain why the forbidden forest had answered an Omega they called moonless. Nathaniel moved to Grace's side, not in front of her this time, but beside her, where everyone could see the choice clearly. The old curse recognizes her, he said. The words carried through the snow. Elder Thomas looked shaken. Your Majesty, that symbol belongs to the first winter pact. It was said the forest would open only when the Northern Crown found its lost guide. Grace looked down at her glowing palm. Lost guide. She had spent her whole life being told she was not enough to lead anyone anywhere. Now the trees beyond the gate shone like they had been waiting for her footsteps. The thought should have made her feel powerful. Instead, it made her feel small in a different way, not worthless, but aware of how large destiny could become when it finally turned toward you. Nathaniel must have felt the tremor in her breathing, because his voice softened. You do not have to answer the forest today. Grace looked at him. He was still pale from the long night, still carrying the quiet strain of the cursed silver, but he stood tall beneath the first line of sunrise, black cloak moving in the wind, silver eyes steady on hers. He did not look like a king demanding a miracle. He looked like a man offering her the one thing no one else had ever given her. Time. And if I never answer it, she asked, then I will still owe you my life. The simplicity of his answer opened something in her chest. Around them, the pack waited, afraid of the silence between a king and an Omega. Grace turned toward Silverpine, toward Mason kneeling in the snow, toward Brooke standing speechless at last, toward the Omegas along the outer edge with their thin cloaks and lifted faces. She thought of every quiet person who had been sent into some kind of darkness because others found it easier not to care. The forest called me, she said slowly. But it did not call me because I was fearless. Her hand closed around the emblem. It called me because I went in afraid and still chose mercy. Nathaniel's gaze changed, and in it she saw recognition deepen into something warmer, something neither of them was ready to name before the world. He turned to the pack. Grace Miller is under the protection of the Northern Crown. By royal order, she will travel with me to Northreach when the sun clears the pines. There, the curse will be studied, the attack on the crown will be judged, and her place will be honored. No one dared object. Mason bowed his head lower. Brooke's eyes glistened, but Grace could not tell if it was regret or fear. Perhaps it no longer mattered. Justice was not always loud. Sometimes it was simply the end of people getting away with harm because no one important had been watching. Nathaniel removed the dark royal clasp from his cloak, a silver pin shaped like a northern star, and placed it in Grace's hand beside the emblem. Not as a claim, he said quietly, for her alone. As proof that you may choose your road now. Grace looked at the two silver symbols resting in her palm, one from the pack that had cast her out, one from the king she had found in the dark. Then she looked toward the forest, where the glowing path stretched deeper than sight. For the first time, her wolf did not whisper. It stood awake inside her, calm and luminous. And Grace understood that the weakest light had never been weak at all. It had only been waiting for the right darkness to reveal what it could do. As sunrise broke over Silverpine, the dark forest opened. The Alpha King stood beside the Omega everyone had abandoned, and somewhere beyond the trees, the curse of the North began to call her name.